So you wanna be a picture book writer, then you gotta write picture books. And you're gonna need a bucket load of bright ideas for titles, plots, and hooks. If you're partial to prose or you're raring to rhyme, then repeat after me, it's a challenge, but I'm gonna tackle each story 1 month at a time with 12 by 12.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 12 by 12 Picture Book Podcast. I'm Julie Headland, published picture book author and founder of the 12 by 12 Picture Book Writing Challenge. And today I am here with Lisa Rogers, who not only is a beautifully published author, we're going to be talking about her books today, she is a former educator, elementary school librarian, and she is a founding member of 12 by 12. What I mean by that is we are now in our 15th year, and Lisa has been a member since the very first year. So needless to say, we have had a lot of common struggles in our journey, common triumphs, and we got to meet in person in 2025, finally, twice. Once in Massachusetts for Heidi Stempel's launch of her picture book, Janie Writes a Play, which was semi-biographical about her mother, Jane Yolen, who was also celebrating, I think, her 85th birthday.
I think so.
And you were there.
Yes,
and
fantastic.
It was very brief. It was so much fun. And then we just saw each other in November during NCTE, and we went to a dueling piano show, which, if you've never been, we had a lot of fun, didn't we?
We had a ton of fun.
It's basically two musicians. One is always playing the piano. Usually they're back and forth, and they kind of riff off each other, and they take requests. But then it's so random, because then one will stand up and start playing the drums or the guitar or whatever. And it's almost like, I would describe it as, it's like a combo of a cover band routine, except not a particular band, combined with stand-up comedy.
And there was dancing and singing.
There was dancing and singing, and that got quite a bit more rowdy as the evening went on. Let me tell you, so NCTE, for those who don't know, that's National Council of Teachers of English, and they have a huge conference every year, and we were both there. Lisa was presenting, and I was there just kind of schmoozing with a lot of 12 by 12 members. But those English teachers, they had like 4 tables in this piano bar where we were, and wow, they partied hard. So if you ever wonder what your English teacher is doing when they were off duty. Anyway.
Right, they're not reading Renaissance poetry. They're having a blast.
Right. So anyway, that's kind of our background. But today we're going to talk about picture books and poetry, because we are in the middle of Poetry Month. And one of the things that I have always admired about you is your beautiful lyrical writing that you bring to all of your subjects. You have written 4 picture book biographies. Your debut picture book, 16 Words, was actually about a poet. Your subject was William Carlos Williams, and specifically his poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. So I thought that was a great place to start for Poetry Month. Like, how risky, I guess it is, or how challenging it must be to be a poet writing a picture book about a poet.
Well, I think for me, everything I write comes from an emotional response. And the reason I was interested in writing about William Carlos Williams was because though I knew the Red Wheelbarrow poem inside and out, for some reason I had never thought about who owned the wheelbarrow. And I read an article in the New York Times that identified the owner of the wheelbarrow, who was a neighbor, friend of William Carlos Williams, and also a patient of William Carlos Williams, who was a doctor. And I thought, oh my goodness, they lived in the same town. They were, friends. They saw each other daily, probably. It's not a big town, and became friends. How could this be? I was just so stunned. I just felt like this. And right at that moment, I said, I have to write about this. I have to write a picture book. And strangely, I wasn't intimidated about writing about him, because I did have very specific object for the book. I knew that I wanted to write about their relationship. I wasn't writing about, I knew of Jen Bryant's beautiful book, A River of Words, and I admired it, and I had taught with it in school. We used Williams' poems to create mental images, and children drew pictures of their ideas about what those poems might look like. So I knew his poetry, but I didn't know this fact. And that just struck me as being so important, so vitally important, to identify this amazing man who inspired a poet to write one of the best known American poems that there is. Right. So because I'm a library teacher and I was a researcher, because I did that when I was working on my English degrees, I dug into research. I spoke to people. I had been a reporter, so I was comfortable interviewing people. I interviewed the borough historian of Rutherford. I interviewed Thaddeus Marshall, who was the owner of the wheelbarrow, whose great-granddaughter. We met in person, and I got to speak to her. I did tons of research, but even before I did all that research, I had the seed of beginning in my mind. And I wrote that down on a trip to beautiful Italy. I knew what I wanted to write. I wanted to parallel the two men's stories and have them come together, show their relationship. And so I carry a little notebook around with me, and I wrote pretty much the beginning right here in this book. I decided I did not want to research too much before I thought of the pacing and the emotion that I wanted in there. If this has happened to me with other books, I over-research and then I forget somehow exactly what that emotion felt like, and then my manuscript is kind of flat. So right here, day after day, Thaddeus Marshall picked up his red wheelbarrow, balanced it on his single tire, and carted it off through the streets of Rutherford, New Jersey. And then I have, day after day, Dr. Williams picked up his tools. He packed his doctor's bag. He lifted it by its handle, blah, blah, blah. So I had that right away. And it just continued that structure and that emotion and kept it very spare. And his poetry was spare. So it kind of worked out, I think.
Yeah, so at the very end of the book, which is beautifully illustrated, by the way, by Chuck Groening, we have the poem, and it makes, what I love about this is that we don't see the poem until the end. We see his relationship and how he incorporated writing into his doctoring, and his relationship with Mr. Marshall, right? Is that
yes? Mm-hmm.
Yes, Marshall, and the wheelbarrow and what the wheelbarrow was used for. And so by the time we get to the poem at the end, it's almost like you're coming at it from a place of familiarity, which I think was your intent. So on this last spread, we have the poem, "So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rain and water beside the white chickens." Beautiful, beautiful. So that's 16 words, William Carlos Williams and the Red Wheelbarrow. You started to get at this, but I'll press you a little bit more on the emotion, starting with the emotion of how you feel. I think that's so interesting. That was the thing that I struggled with so much in my own biography, Song After Song, The Musical Life of Julie Andrews, because, well, there were a lot of reasons, but I did not have an emotional through line for like 6 or 7 years of writing that book.
I totally understand.
And so did you, with your other 3 biographies, and I'm just going to mention them, we have Beautiful Noise, The Music of John Cage. This book is a masterpiece, by the way, illustrated by Il Sung Na, and Joan Mitchell paints a symphony, illustrated by Stacy Innerst, and Woody's Words, Woodrow Wilson Rawls, and Where the Red Fern Grows, illustrated by Susan Reagan. And one of the commonalities here is all of these subjects are artists. In some ways, we have a painter, we have a musician, we have a novelist, and in William Carlos Williams, we have a poet. I don't think that's by accident, right?
I guess it's not. I don't intentionally look for subjects. They just kind of come to me. But I think I've always been very interested in how people are inspired to do what they do and how they achieve what they do, because I was mystified as a child. I could read biographies, but I never really understood what drove people to do what they did or what it takes to do it. What they do. But maybe now that I know what it takes to be an author, it's easier to get into that space. However, that doesn't mean I'm successful every time with getting it right the first time. So like you, I really struggled with the John Cage book. He was such a fascinating person, and I wanted to tell everything about him. And I don't think I had really an emotional through line for some time until I woke up one morning and the book basically just spooled out of me, and I scribbled everything down and hoped that I could read it later. And that was pretty much how that book came out. I mean, I didn't change it that much for the published book, but it had been rejected, writers should know, 2 times before by the same editor who bought it the 3rd time.
Wow. Mm-hmm. This one's interesting because it's written in second person. You're addressing the reader, and the questions you ask are so compelling that you forget that you're reading a biography, because so I'm just going to read the opening so that people can hear the question, the voice, the tone that you wrote, the narrative voice of the manuscript, but also the poetry that comes through in the writing. Great. So it starts, what if all the sounds you heard, a garbage truck screeching, feet skipping, pigeons scattering, tires whispering, cats hissing, children giggling, balls bouncing, dog tags clinking, I love that one, taxis vrooming, sounded to you like music? Then you'd be like John Cage. So before you've even said the name of the person that we're reading about, I'm hearing the sounds of the garbage trucks and the pigeons and the cats and the dogs and all of that, and I'm thinking about all these sounds being combined, which is such a great way to introduce somebody whose art was incredibly complex. Right?
Very true. Yes. I mean,
so did it start this way, written in second person, or did you try doing like a straight up biography?
I tried writing straight biography, then that was rejected. So then I added a lot of onomatopoeia, and then I just set it aside and I forgot about it pretty much for about 6 months. And then one morning I woke up and that was what happened in my mind, and that's what I wrote down. Mm-hmm. But I think to your question about why I write about artists, I think it's because I want readers to have a way to know what I never knew. And I really am wanting to inspire children or any reader to be creative and to take that leap, to make something, to try something new. And I think it also comes out of my years of teaching, because when I was presenting books to children, I wanted them to take that information and do something with it in their mind. It wasn't like I was just reading for entertainment. It was reading to learn and to be inspired and to know things. And so I think that's what I'm trying to bring with to my own work.
Yeah. Well, it's working. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely love about picture book biographies is how much I learn as a quote unquote grown ass adult, about people that maybe I've known peripherally, maybe I didn't know about at all, but then all in such a digestible format. And that was certainly one of my inspirations for writing a picture book biography myself. But I will say for me, it's just an overall weakness of mine that I don't tend to figure out what I'm writing about until I'm well into it. I really wish I could be the kind of person who sat down and it's like, okay, this book is going to be about this. And then I organized the writing around that theme or that takeaway. And I'm really not good at that. But when you get that piece, which is what really struck me about the John Cage book, when you get that piece and you can use that as an organizing principle, then it makes it look easy.
It makes it look easy.
It was there all the time, right?
Right. I said to myself,
So I want to just read the last line. I'm not going to read everything in between because you want people to get these books. But I love this. You don't have to bang on a bathtub or brush cactus spines with a feather or blow a seashell like a trumpet or do any of the things he did except for one. To be like John Cage, the only thing you have to do is listen. It's like,
very true.
Wow, right?
Right. And
yeah.
When I wrote that, I thought, oh, that's what this book was about. Why didn't I get this sooner? Why did it take me so long to figure it out? It comes when it comes.
Okay, we are going to talk about poetry and how it's influenced your writing, but before we do that, I have to ask you, and this is sort of like a little bit of a bone pickish kind of issue, and I might have even mentioned it to you. So you and I are both huge dog lovers. And if anybody is watching this on YouTube versus listening, you can see behind Lisa's shoulder there the book Hound Won't Go, which is not a picture book biography, but anybody who's owned a hound at some point will get this book, or anybody who's had a particularly stubborn dog, and it's written in simple rhyme, and it's actually one of my favorites of yours. So we're both huge dog lovers, and we both love hounds in particular. When we first came upon one another, you had Tucker, who was the inspiration for Hound Won't Go, and I had Rocky, who was infamous in every way in 12 by 12 circles for all of the mayhem that he created in my life. I don't have a hound anymore. I do have a Woodle named Pepper. But anyway, coming from this place of being a huge dog lover, I was shocked when I saw that you were writing a book about Woodrow Wilson Rawls, Where the Red Fern Grows. And I don't know if you remember me asking you this, but I was like, Okay, I refuse to read that book. I won't read it. And even though I know people who are big dog lovers who've loved it and who read it over and over. My cousin is a second grade teacher, and that was one of the books that she would read to her kids every year. But I was like, how could you do that? So that's what I'm asking is like, did you have to read the book? And did you?
I did.
You had to read the book, right?
I had to read the book. And it's a beautiful book. The language is absolutely gorgeous. And I don't know if I told you this story, but I had never read Where the Red Fern Grows. But my daughter had, and she cried at the end. She was maybe in third grade. And she said, Mom, he makes you love these dogs so much. And okay. So I had to do a lot of bibliotherapy after that.
Right.
But what sparked this book was that one of my students came to me and told me how much he loved this book. And he kind of assumed that I had read it. And I was ashamed that I hadn't read this classic book. So took it home and read it. And yes, it was sad, but sad in a meaningful way, right? It's not gratuitous in any way. So, but what got me was, how did Wilson Rawls become such a beautiful writer when he had no access to books or library education? He had no pencils or paper. And so that was my emotional through line for this. Like, how did that happen? But then the through line actually changed as I researched, which is kind of an interesting thing. It was about how he quit writing, which, as you know, I almost did, but I rejoined 12 by 12.
That's right. In fact, you said we have a success story video from you that we recorded a couple years ago where you said that it wasn't until you joined 12 by 12 that you really committed to yourself and to your writing, and that was a game changer for you. What I thought when I read Woody's words, which is Woodrow Wilson and Where the Red Fern Grows, was if you are a writer of any kind, but this audience is typically picture books. If you have ever thought to yourself how hard it is to find time to write or anything, you need to read this book. Because this is wild. It's wild, the story of how this person who essentially had nothing growing up in the Great Depression, and the other thing I didn't know was that he was a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. So his family had been relocated. They had no resources. He went to jail because I was just like, and he wrote in the dirt and just all of these things. Like if you think that you've struggled in your journey as a writer, read this. And it's of course beautifully written. And I love that it is about a writer and that he had his huge moments of doubt and kept going. So one thing that I always say, because a lot of people will ask me questions about writing and what it takes and how to do it and all of that. And sometimes people will ask, how do I know when it's time to quit? Mm-hmm. And what I always say is, if you can quit, you should do it right now. If you can quit, absolutely do not pass go, do not collect to quit. Because that means, because if you're really a writer and you're meant to write and you're meant to express yourself in words or art, if you're an illustrator, you cannot quit. You just can't. And that can be an affliction sometimes. And if you can't quit, then like Woody, you have to go and find people who will support you. You have to you have to find a way to make the time and give the resources. In this case, he was lucky that his wife was so supportive. But if you can quit, because this is not an easy business.
Not at all. And making it a priority is really the key because, as you know, as I said in that earlier video, I did many other things during the time that I was in 12 by 12. I ran 4 marathons. I trained for 5. So that was a huge chunk of time. And some people can write in their minds when they're running. I can do that for a short period of time, but not during the long runs necessary. So I was doing all sorts of other things. And I really needed to say, okay, I want this. I'm not giving up. I'm going to get there because I am going to find the stories I'm meant to write, which is, I think, really the crucial piece. I was not writing the stories I was meant to write at the beginning. And I think that I'm glad I still wrote those stories because it helped get me to what I am meant to write. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the growth.
How do you think that that's evolved as you've continued to write and publish books? Like, are you more able to feel sooner rather than later whether you're meant to write a story or not? And
yes.
Why and how do you think that works?
I think I know whether it's something I'm going to be committed to, something I feel really strongly about, not just a casual interest in. It has to be something that I need to write. I need to write it because I want to know. Mm-hmm. And I will discover, I hope, through my research and my own writing, what that is that I want to know, that I want to communicate, that I want to use to help inspire other people.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in honor of it being Poetry Month, and you clearly use tools from poetry and poetic devices even in your books that aren't poems, because I know you're a published poet also. But can you talk about how loving poetry, reading poetry, and writing poetry helps with writing picture books?
Picture books are poems. So I really feel like the study of poetry is essential, not the study of rhyming. Like, don't think of it that way, please. It is the lyrical words that you want to pay attention to when you're reading a story. And reading out loud a picture book out loud is like reading a poem. And that I internalized through 22 years of reading every day to children, reading with children every day. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but the pacing is key. The word choice, the juicy words, not overdoing something, the page turn, all of those elements are part of poetry because the page turn is like a stanza break in a poem. And I read lots of poetry. I love reading poetry, and I highly recommend this beautiful book, All the Small Poems and 14 More by Valerie Worth. And it doesn't hurt that the pictures are by Natalie Babbitt. Beautiful short poems that pack so much in them. And I use this book a lot to inspire my students to write poetry. And I read to inspire myself too, because the word choices make such a difference. One thing I sometimes do if I do a poetry workshop, I ask people to think about the words, and I stole this from Mary Oliver, rock and stone. Mm-hmm. What do they look like? So are you going to use the word rock in your writing, or are you going to use the word stone? There's a huge difference. They even sound very different. The sounds of words are huge in terms of creating meaning. So that's one takeaway. Pay attention to the sounds of the words. It's not just the words on the page. It's the way they sound, the way they work together, and the way they build meaning.
Yes, and the way that they're wrapped within each other, you know?
Yes.
One story that I have about that very specific word choice. And if I'm going to give you a minute to think about a revision maybe that you did where you changed just a small something, but it made a huge difference. That happened to me when I was writing My Love for You is the Sun, which is a rhyming picture book, lyrical bedtime poem. And Emma Walton Hamilton was my editor. And each spread or stanza was relating love to something in nature. And this particular one was My Love for You is a Star. And then it was what I had written was sparkling pinpoint in the sky. It keeps you under watchful eye. And she suggested gemstone instead of pinpoint, right? Same emphasis, right? Gemstone, pinpoint, but so different in terms of its feel and like the magic of it and the ethereality, if you will. Like, I still think about that every time I read that book out loud. Like, thank goodness we changed it to gemstone, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story, because I think precision is extremely important. Words are similar to each other, but they are not the same. And yeah, I had taken a semantics class in college, which was way too hard for me. But I did learn that no two words mean the same at all. You may use them in similar ways, but they are completely different. And gemstone gives a completely different image in your mind than pinpoint. Right. It's all about making mental images. Mm-hmm. These books are being read to children, so they are making mental images as you read to them. So
right,
yay for you, gemstone. You accepted that. You accepted that suggestion.
I did, and it was really just, of course that's the right word. And I think that's part of what poetry is really finding the exact right word in the exact right order. And I mentioned that because about the emphasis, the meter of the two words being the same, because I think especially for people when they're writing in rhyme, they're really, if they're already advanced beyond just throwing words together and making the ends rhyme, right. If they're advanced enough to know about meter, then they're really thinking about where the emphasis is on the syllables and making sure that it matches. But even that's not enough, because pinpoint and gemstone have the exact same meter, and yet, so either is serviceable in terms of making the meter of that line work.
Right. But pinpoint is pinpoint is a very sort of sharp word.
Right.
Pinpoint.
Yeah.
And gemstone. Like, think of the O. Like, this is what I think about when I look at my words. I think about how they sound. And it makes a huge difference. So, like, I used a funny, I can't think of a word that I have substituted, but I wrote this poem for Gnomes and Unknowns, a book published by the Writer's Buffin anthology. Yeah. So I wrote a poem called The Seven-Headed Dragon, and I rhymed the words superfluous and reassure us. This wily creature with head superfluous might take pains to reassure, I don't know, something like that. Reassure us that it's no foe. Come close? Oh, no.
Right.
So, you can have so much more fun if you try and use the unexpected word rather than the
expected. Absolutely. All right. Well, we could talk for another forever about all of this. I really appreciate it. I like to end with, because we're writers and we should be reading a lot of books, picture books, but any books that will inspire us. So I like to ask, what book do you wish you had written and why?
So I don't think that I could write any of the books that are out there other than my own. But I can tell you about books I admire. And one I love, 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 which is so gorgeous, is like Kari Lavelle, Ode to Grapefruit, how James Earl Jones found his voice, illustrated by the amazing Brian Collier. This is definitely something everybody should read, for word choice, for the way the biography is told. Mama urged, Mama just didn't say, urged needed to be there, right? So Kari clearly made specific word choices. Just so many beautiful books. I love picture book biographies. It was my favorite genre when I was teaching. I love anything by Jen Bryant, Six Dots, a Louis Braille book. And pretty much any poetry book is something I love.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. And I actually like the sentiment of knowing yourself and your writing well enough that you could only write the books that you have written, and other people should write the books that they have to write. So with that, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much for sharing your words and your wisdom. Happy Poetry Month. And everybody, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at 12 by 12 Challenge. That's 12x12challenge.com/poetry playbook. And you can get that and play with poetry this month. Thank you again, Lisa, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy Poetry Month.
Thanks.
Do it together so never you fear. It's a handy little way to help you kick into gear. You're amazing, exciting. Look out, 'cause you're writing 12 by 12. 12 manuscripts. 12 by 12. 12 picture books. 12 by 12.